We're the hottest station in town. Whatever you need, it's right here on 910 AM Superstation. The most powerful voices in the urban community. 910 AM Superstation gives you the flip side, the real side. This is our side.
Listen live now.
The #1 station, period.
And on that note, let's get back to the program.
You are listening to 910 AM Superstation, Detroit's only urban talk radio station.
And good morning. You're listening to 910 AM Superstation, the future of radio. You can call us at 313-778-7600. That's 313-778-7600. This is your host, Robert Ficano. And we have now in the studio, he couldn't wait to just be on the phone, Commissioner Willie Burton. He brought a guest, Scotty Boman, not the former coach of the Montreal Canadiens or the Detroit Red Wings, but a person who is going to tell us a little bit what he's doing about the police commission relationships and understanding what they're about. And also, we're very fortunate to have with us Captain Jackson, the 24-year veteran of the Detroit Police Department. But joining us on the line, someone who's probably talked to all of you one way or another, George Hunter from the Detroit News. George, you with us?
Yeah, good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us here this morning. It looks like we got quite a panel and roundtable. I know with some of the reporting that you've been doing in terms of the Detroit Police Department and some of the things that you're covering, I know of recent time has been green light. I know that it's started to draw a little bit of controversy about whether the response comes directly, from the green light, and if you don't have it, are you set back in priority and things such as that. Were you able to cover a story on that, or I know Detroit News did cover a story on that?
Yeah, that was mine. I visited several gas stations, and most of the people I spoke with didn't want to go on record. So it's interesting. There's the rest of the story, kind of Paul Harvey thing. So I wrote my story in which I led with a guy who claimed that he called the police and he was told by dispatch that, because he wasn't agreeing, some guy was tearing his store up. And he claimed that because the dispatcher told him, because you're not a green light, you don't get priority. Okay. And so then I talked to others, and they said they object. Basically existentially, they object to the idea that they're already paying taxes. Why should they have to pay extra? They're paying for police protection. Why should they have to pay extra? But it's important to note that the guy that I quoted, after the story ran, there wasn't time for them to do it before because it's a daily newspaper, but they actually looked up this case, and I did a follow-up story. It turns out that guy wasn't completely truthful. That was never said on dispatch. It wasn't said. And they arrived. They had done several what's known as special, help me out there, Lieutenant, special attentions. Special attentions. Yeah, where they had done several of those in the past. So that particular guy.
Okay. For our listening audience, let's define what's a special attention.
A special attention would be something where an officer who's out on patrol would come by. Based on information that he's received from different crime briefings, different, community relations events where businesses or specific addresses in residential neighborhoods have some safety concerns or have some issues that they may want to address. And so officers, as part of their routine patrol, would make sure that they specially, give those people special attention to ensure that those environments are safe.
So, George, that's kind of interesting. So you went back and historically and found out that this particular location had received a lot of attention one way or another.
Sure, there were several instances, and they showed me the information where they actually said for no reason they just stopped by to make sure everything's okay. So that being the case, that guy stretched the truth a little bit. But however, I did talk to several people who just philosophically they have an issue with, as I said, hey, we're paying taxes already. Why should I have to pay extra money? On the other side of that, and help me with this, Lieutenant, there was a gas station.
Let me correct, it's Captain, but that's all right.
Captain, I'm sorry, I demoted you.
Yeah.
there was a gas station ordinance passed in, I believe, 2014, and it kind of just fell off the map. Where, if you guys remember, I believe it was under Bing, they passed an ordinance whereby all gas stations had to have video cameras. And I don't think that ever got enforced. It kind of petered out, I believe. But the point being that, that kind of fits into this equation too, because they say that they're looking at making this possibly down the road,
mandatory,
making it mandatory, down the road. But there already was a mandatory that they get. So the question, I guess, is if somebody, let's say when the gas station ordinance passed, let's say, again, I was told that not a lot of people complied with it, but let's assume that some guy says, hey, this is an ordinance, and he's conscientious business owner. He goes out and spends a bunch of money to get a video system per that thing. I guess there's a question there, too. Would that be fair for him to now have to go back and spend more money to get a green light compliance? He followed the law when it was passed. I believe it was 2014. So there's a lot of excess. But, again, on the other side, the numbers really don't lie. The crime around those green lights has dropped. And there was one real quick, if I could tell a quick story. There was Horace Sheffield has an organization there. I believe it's on Grand River. It's on the west side.
Yeah, he has it at Grand River, I think, off Wyoming.
Yeah, and the crime outside this gas station was so bad, they were about to picket him. And they offered to pony up and pay for the green light, and they did. And I followed up with him, and he said there's been no crime there since then. Now I know there was but that's outside. That's a little down the street. So he said that the crime outside this gas station has dropped to next to nothing. Actually, nothing. He said there's not been one incident, and there were several cases where people were getting mugged and beat up and all kinds of things. So there's two sides of the coin. The police say that this thing is absolutely incredibly effective, and it's lowering crime. And then you have people that say, well, maybe I think it comes down to the money. They don't want to pay for it.
Well, George, one of the things that's fascinating about it from a psychological standpoint is that I know we're focusing on the cost, which, the $4,000 isn't a small amount to pay. The fact that that it's recording and seeing everything that's going on. At the same time, I think sometimes we don't talk about the detrimental effect it has in terms of if I'm a criminal and I'm looking around, it's the same reason why somebody, even if they don't have an alarm, they put an alarm sign on at their house and says, this house is guarded by whatever alarm company. It's a form of deterrence, and they say, okay, I don't think I'm going to necessarily go in this location because they might have an immediate response to if I'm thinking of carjacking or robbing or whatever it is in this particular instance. So it has the one effect that if the criminal does want to engage and he's going to do something, or she, that it's recorded and there's going to be a response and everything else, in theory the way it's supposed to work. But also it's so hard to measure. You can't measure a negative because you don't know how many criminals might have looked at that green light and say, you know what, I'm not going to go into this place. I'm going to go someplace else. There's no statistic to verify what that is or how that goes in the process.
They do have stats for crime in and around these green lights, and they've dropped considerably.
Which is probably the closest you can get to.
There's no way to tell. I'm sorry, Bob. There's no way to tell for sure that guys would have done it if it wasn't a green light. So I think they certainly point to. Chief Craig said that he believes that there's been correct me if I'm wrong here, Kevin. A 30% drop in carjackings, a huge drop in carjackings over the last couple of years, and he credits the green light with a whole big chunk of that. Most of the carjackings were happening around the gas stations.
I think what happens is the presence of the green light gas station provides an enhancement to reduce the opportunity for crime. Because what happens is I guess, first of all, I want to say this, that, they're not paying for extra service to feel safe and secure, within the city of Detroit at a gas station. Some of the additional costs are associated with the type of enhancements that they're actually receiving. There's real-time crime video feed at that particular gas station. So if a crime occurs or if there's some sort of alert or warning, we're able to monitor that in real time with state-of-the-art technology
So somebody looking at these gas stations, and the owner may not know because they're back in the store portion of it, that somebody's at the gas pump and starting to get in an altercation, or they can actually see a gun or something come out. Are they automatically monitoring this and saying, "Oh, there's a problem at
They're automatically monitoring this. This is our virtual patrol, and so we're constantly alerted to things that are occurring at the gas station before they advance to becoming a critical or crisis type incident.
Years before, green light arrived.
This is Commissioner Burton.
There was a number of crimes that was taking place outside of these gas stations and outside of these party stores. And whenever the police department would come to do their investigation or whatever, there was never any footage from these businesses because they had cameras that didn't work. So now one of the things...
Right.
So now one of the things that are working now is green light and allowing DPD to be able to tap into those camera systems and see what's going on in real time. So a lot of people are starting to become fascinated with the whole idea of green light, and to see that green bulb glowing outside at night with that green signage on the building, it is a great deterrent, and it's definitely working here. I would love to see throughout the state, possibly throughout the county, to someday go green light.
Well, I understand that Greektown. You ought to be in the marketing here, Willie. I understand that that Greektown has gone completely, with the green light 24/7 in terms of monitoring their particular location. But it raised an interesting question. I heard somebody talk about it, and for example, I know that Dan Gilbert, with all his buildings, has private cameras that are all over the streets as well. And that were saying that, because the casino, which he owns, Greektown, which is right next to Greektown, that they already have the cameras. How much of an interaction is there? Can the police go and do they ask for help from the cameras of if there's a crime in Greektown, for example? If they didn't have green light, can you go and say, look, I know you got a number of private cameras on here. We're seeing private cameras, really engage more and more within all the communities and things like that. Do the police have an actual access to go and look at those cameras? And it raises a legal issue, in terms of normally we know how search and seizure works. Sometimes, the police are going to have to get a warrant. They're going to go in. A private citizen goes in and finds something and runs out with it. They can present it to the police, and it's not the same standard, whether it be admitted into court or not. Can you actually get access to these private cameras? And would you have to get a warrant, or can the private entrepreneur or private company just say, no, this is ours, we're not going to show it to you?
It's interesting that you would ask that because my particular unit at the time, which was gang intelligence, when we had the assaults that took place down in the downtown Greektown area, we had to work in conjunction with our partner, which was Greektown and Rock Ventures, in order to, establish identities and move that investigation forward. There is a legal process that is in place in us obtaining that information from our partner, and we adhere to it. Ultimately, we just want to make sure people are safe, but we still have to do that within the confines of doing it constitutionally.
Yeah, I mean, it raises as a lawyer, it raises a fascinating question to me. Because you have a private camera, which in theory, if it's the same as you hold it to the Fourth Amendment, and not to get technical with it, but a private citizen can walk into a house and actually, if they're obtaining something that is fruits of a crime or something like that, they can bring it out to the police. The police just can't walk into the house without a warrant or probable cause and say, what they're trying to seize as well. It's a whole different. It's the same thing as the government listening on a wiretap versus a private citizen. As long as one of the two is privately saying it's okay, they can tap it and then they can turn it over to the police versus the police better have probable cause and a warrant in order to wiretap the individual. Okay, we have our coach here wanting to step in.
Yeah. My personal experience when I'm talking to business owners is that there's a broad, expansive difference between the idea, one, of green light and two, of it being mandatory. That there's a big difference on the feeling about that. The general consensus that I run into is that a good idea does not need to be mandatory because it sells itself, and it has sold itself as a voluntary program. A lot of people have picked up on green light, and I think most people would agree it's to their benefit to have that kind of security on their place. But it's a private business decision. As you've mentioned, there are people that have their own security systems, and actually every gas station I have gone to prior to this has had some kind of camera system, but a lot of times you watch the news and you can't tell who's on the video because the quality's so low. So I think that's one big part. I've talked to business owners who are have it very difficult to operate because of all the expenses they have keeping up with city regulations on that matter. So I think the idea of making it mandatory is problematic as from a business perspective, and then the other area is specifically, yes, the privacy issue, that effectively you're going on a slippery slope and the government can mandate recording things within a business where, okay, granted, it may be open to the public, but it is private property, and you're starting to edge into that area where now you're could be recording maybe a conversation between a couple employees and so on. So it starts drifting into that range where if it's voluntary, then they're already opening it up. And if you got the green light out there, a customer coming there, they already know they're under surveillance. They've been told. But otherwise, when it's mandatory, you're kind of pushing into another realm.
I guess
there's another consequence.
Go ahead, George.
There's another consequence that if they make this mandatory, they're going to have to hire more cops. Because I do hear this from the rank and file. They won't go on the record and say this, but I've heard grumbling. They call them potato chip runs. And you may have heard this, Captain. Let's say you have two equal things. When the cop gets on his shift, he's got a backup of calls that he's supposed to go to. Well, green light has been promised that they're going to get priority one status. And the cops, they have to drop what they're doing if there's no serious crime, and they got to go to what they call a potato chip run. And, that takes time out of the other stuff they could be doing, what they call a potato chip. Someone stole a bag of chips from the green light, now they get priority one. You got to get there. Well, if they're going to extend that to businesses, they're going to need more cops. I think the chief even told me that if it becomes mandatory, there's no question they're going to have to hire more people for the real-time crime center and for the police, for the uniformed officers. So that poses a problem. And I had one question to the captain or any. Okay, Bob, you said earlier that people put up fake signs. I had one when I lived in Southwest Detroit. I didn't have an alarm system, but I had this house guarded by the. What's to stop someone from buying a green light and putting it up? Is there anything?
I guess that's a great question.
If this is Captain Jackson, if I can chime in, I think that's exactly the issue. The challenge for law enforcement is not that you just have cameras up or mock cameras up, as we indicate, but that you actually have something that, could provide some evidentiary value. Some of the challenges that we run into as crimes have occurred is we find out that people have unmanned cameras or unoperable, systems in their stores. And so it puts us behind the eight ball on being able to bring those things to resolve. So, no, there's no ordinance saying that you can't put up a fake green light at this point. But the thing about it is what's the real benefit that are you trying to get from having a fake green light?
George, I'll tell you what, we got to go to, George, hold that thought. We got to go, everybody here, hold that thought. We got to go to break. If you want to join us in the conversation, you can call at 313-778-7600.
Happy Black History Month.
Hi, this is Al Sharpton with another moment in Black history.
Let freedom ring, and if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. So let freedom ring from the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire. Let freedom ring from the mighty mountains of New York. Let freedom ring from the heightening Alleghanies of Pennsylvania. Let freedom ring from the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado. Let freedom ring from the herbaceous slopes of California. Not only that, let freedom ring from the Stone Mountain of Georgia. We will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual. Free at last, free at last, thank God Almighty, free at last.
910 AM Superstation. We are the future of radio. 910 AM Superstation is the voice of the people. Don't believe me? Just listen.
910 AM is constantly hot, from intense debate to the funniest commentary. 910 has it all.
We appreciate the love, and we can feel the support of the city. Keep it coming.
I love catching 910 AM news on social media. It's the way I love my news. Short, simple, and straight to the point.
So when you think of 910 AM Superstation, we want you to tune in, call in, and don't forget to find us on social media. 910 AM Superstation is the voice of the people. Don't believe me? Just listen.
I absolutely love this radio station. This station gets me through the work week.
And we don't just show love to the callers. We see the comments and the posts too.
I'm always on the go, so being able to watch all my favorite hosts on 910 AM mobile app is amazing.
So when you think of 910 AM Superstation, we want you to tune in, call in, and don't forget to find us on social media.
And good morning. You're listening to Robert Ficano on 910 AM Superstation. We have a number of guests that have joined us and appreciate it. We have Scotty Boman from his organization. We're going to let him explain what exactly they do in a minute here. We have on the phone George Hunter, writer and reporter for the Detroit News, Commissioner Willie Burton, and Captain Jackson. I think we covered the bases here. You were about to ask a question, George, before we get to Mr. Boman here.
I'm sorry, what was the question about?
I'm sorry, I thought you were going to ask a question before we went to break.
No, I just mentioned that what's to stop someone from putting a fake green light. I was being kind of facetious. But, I mean, it does act as a deterrent, just like a sign. But yeah, I mean, of course, that's not all that they get. And, the stats are pretty solid around these stations that it does work. But the gentleman who said that they don't want to join them, that's exactly right. I talked to the head of the Restaurant Association when I did a story in June about this, and he mirrored exactly what you said. That I would encourage all our members to join, but when you start making it mandatory, now you're getting into some sticky situations. But that's not the only. Clinton Township, for instance, has a mandatory thing where their gas stations and stores have to have video cameras, so it's not unprecedented.
That's fascinating that you bring that up about an ordinance. I mean, as an attorney, right away you put the cap on. If somebody's assaulted if I'm a victim at a gas station, there was a mandate. There's supposed to be video, and I want to, find out what was going on. It seems like it's opening up a whole lawsuit that says you were supposed to have this. It was mandated. I want to know, because I've been injured, who I can sue and things like that. And it seems like it'd be an interesting situation in terms of litigation. Commissioner Burton, before we get to that, I know you brought us a guest, Mr. Boman. Why don't you explain a little bit of your organization, what you do, and what you do to work with Commissioner Burton and the Detroit PD?
Okay, well, first of all, my name's Scotty Boman, and the organization's called Detroit Residents Advancing Civilian Oversight. And the reason I formed it was back in 2017, just last year, when I was a candidate for Board of Police Commissioners. I was going door to door and talking to different people about the what I was doing. And what I learned from that initially was that most people did not know, one, that we had a Board of Police Commissioners, and two, what it was, and three, what its role was in the city government. And so, I mean, a lot of people, for instance, thought like, oh, so you're running against Chief Craig, for instance. That might be one reaction. or, because they're picturing like one person, a commissioner, and there was a time when we had that. So I had to go through the whole process of explaining what it was. And so now that whole period's over, that the election season's done and all that, and I'm still in private life, I realized that there is a value to what I was doing before, and that was educating the community about what the role of the Board of Police Commissioner is, and that it is an elected position, that the role is civilian oversight, that was founded in order to have a separate organization to oversee the Detroit Police Department, to attend to citizens' concerns and grievances about anything happening within the department, that it is not the same as internal affairs, which also looks into, for instance, complaints about what happens within the department, but rather an external organization that is a civilian board. So that part right there is one thing, and that even is a board and not one individual that's a commissioner. It was a big part of the educational effort.
I appreciate it, and thanks for coming in. Before, and I know Commissioner Burton, you want to make a comment here. George, getting back to what you said, it was interesting when you talked about, you said a potato chip run, and the way you described it about the police officers. You know what struck me about that, though, is that it sort of goes to the heart of the broken windows theory in police. Now, within the police, enclave, what that basically means, and it started out of New York, is that if the theory is that if a criminal is walking in the neighborhood and they see a broken window, they walk by it on day one, and then it goes day 2, day 3, and they see that the window isn't fixed. They say, you know what, this community doesn't care. It makes it, in theory, more subjective to me wanting, if I want to do criminal activity, people aren't looking out for one another. They're not taking care of stuff and doing things. And I know in New York really cleaned up its act by going to this type of theory about little things that they were cleaning up. In fact, Times Square, now I talk to my kids, they don't understand what Times Square was at one time versus what it is today. It's a magnet for, besides just dropping the balloon on New Year's Eve, that it's now a place that a lot of people congregate, they go through and things like that. At one time, it was a haven for prostitution and peep shows and everything else, and that's the only type of people that actually visited, that type of area, and it really changed it. And it went along the theory of, if you start with small things and you make sure that those things are taken care of, it eventually changes. Now, it's caused a lot of controversy. I mean, now you have that was under Mayor Giuliani. Now de Blasio's there, and he's pulled that back in terms of how that's looked at, because he thought that the police became over aggressive, and they had some of the famous cases where that one individual died because he was selling loosies. He was selling the single cigarettes on the street, and people said, well, that was an overreaction. Why are you worried about one guy selling one cigarette? Where it was actually the business owners were saying, look, I got to sell it by the carton or by the pack. I can't sell it. It's against the law to sell one cigarette. So can you please take care of this issue? I mean, when you mentioned potato chip run, it just sort of triggered all that, and saying, well, in New York, that sort of became the basis by which they started cleaning it up. Now, granted, they became overly aggressive, probably in the police officers, and it was targeted, they said, at certain communities and things like that is the way that it went. But when you mentioned it, it just sort of spurred the old teacher in me there, George, on what happens when you look at small things and if you actually deal with it.
And that's an initiative by the former police commissioner in New York, Bill Bratton. And Chief Craig is a huge Bill Bratton disciple. I believe he was also in L.A. while Craig was over there. And he unabashedly is a openly disciple of Bill Bratton and his policing methods. Here's the issue: is a lot of these policing methods do work. The question is, people complain about them. Stop and frisk works. There's no question that it works. But people don't like it because they say, certain segments of the population get stopped more often. And Craig, particularly in Detroit, they say black people get stopped more often. Craig, who was black, says, well, Detroit's 80% black, and just about that same percentage is committing the crime. So of course we're going to stop more black. So that's the problem, is that people don't like it. But there's no question that broken windows, and every empirical study I've seen, broken windows, which I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe stop and frisk is sort of in the broken windows umbrella. If I see
it is a stop and frisk. Yeah. Basically, stop and frisk actually evolved. We're getting real technical here, from a Supreme Court case called the Terry stop. And the stop and frisk technically is for the protection of the police officer, that when he's talking to you, or she is talking to you, they can check to make sure you don't have a weapon that can be of a danger to a police officer. I mean, that has how all of this has sort of evolved into what we have today. It was, by the United States Supreme Court and everything else, the way that it was set up. Commissioner Burton, I think you wanted to chime in on this for a minute here.
I want to. We was talking about green light, and we was talking about the gas stations, and I just wanted to say that when it comes to making it mandatory for businesses to go green light, I'm a strong advocate for green light. Just want to throw that out there. Just want that to be crystal clear. But I don't think that it should be mandatory, for all businesses to go green light. I think it should still be a choice. And to go back to stop and frisk, my community, that I serve, they definitely are totally against the stop and frisk. But the good thing about it is we don't have that here in the city of Detroit. So that's a good thing. Yeah, I mean,
the only way you can really have it is if the police officer feels that there might, and he need probable cause. I mean, it's a different threshold. It's not just them saying, I don't like the way you look. Let me stop and frisk you. It's got to be a way they can actually articulate a danger that they feel that's there, and they want to search the person for a weapon. In theory, that's supposed to be a pretty significant threshold that the officer's got to overcome. But a lot of people believe that it's done because the color of your skin and things like that, and you're being stopped in the process. Okay, we have Elena on. I know, Elena, this is near and dear to your heart. You're a co-host here that comes on. So tell us what you're thinking about here.
Thank you. I think that the stop and frisk, and the reason that it was stopped in New York by that Manhattan Institute, was because it was so wildly discriminatory in terms of the over-policing of black and brown communities, and that it is a license to profile and to license to police people. And if you're looking at certain people, and of course it's going to be effective if you're arresting everybody, you're bound to get people who are somehow afoul of the law. But if you're rounding up everyone, then what do we really have there? Number one. And number two, the green light. Somebody broke into my front door last week. I live in beautiful Corktown. Somebody broke my front door lock right in the middle of the block, right in, like the front door, which has always been sort of a Corktown tradition. The old timers always say, yeah, they always come in the front door for some reason. But I wanted to just say that I put up a little green light on my front porch, and I hope that if I call the police that I'll get the same kind of attention that a business that had to pay protection money will get. But I'm not sure about that. My tax dollars are every bit as important to me as anybody else's. So I just wanted to say that. Stop and frisk is extremely unfair, and it's racist on the face of it, and it should be called that. Don't dance around and say certain segments. It is black and brown people. Thank you. All right. Thanks, Elena. Thanks. And you can hear her on 6 to 8 on Sundays, right before our show comes on with it. This is the unfortunate thing that, this week another Detroit police officer was buried because he was killed in the line of duty. And one of the things also that I teach, full disclosure, here at Wayne County Community College, former sheriff, and I teach in the criminal justice program. But one of the things that we have been able to sense is that there is a lack of trust, not in terms of a significant amount, I should say, but there is
a lack of enthusiasm now of attracting students into some of the law enforcement field because they've seen on TV so many of the images of what happens to police officers and not understanding sometimes the circumstances. I mean, let's face it, they're seeing a 15 or 20-second clip of a police officer making a decision. We've always advocated that the reason why you go and get your degree is that leads you to more critical thinking in that 10 to 15 seconds, which becomes critical. You could be trained to death, but without critical thinking, the training isn't always going to help you in every circumstance. But, the police officers, unfortunately, become targets. And I think sometimes there's more, people feel, not that they have immunity, but they feel that they can be more liberal in what they do in terms of confronting police officers, confronting circumstances that normally, if you just work with them, or if you just respond to what the police officer is asking or inquiring about, it goes without incident. Unfortunately, we've seen now where it's stepped up, and we see it. There's been too many police officers that have been killed, and there's too much crime that goes on. Any citizen, that faces violence, that is too much. But it seems like police officers are being made a target as well.
And I got to be honest, Bob, not the Detroit News, I will say that up front, but many in my industry, the media, have not helped. We fan the flames, and not we, because the Detroit News doesn't do that. I'm proud to say that the Detroit News has a reputation to be fair when it comes to covering law enforcement. But I see many media outlets, particularly the national ones, that leave certain information out. They alter things. Trayvon Martin, they took out words. That should have been a huge scandal. It really wasn't. I think it was NBC. They removed words to make it sound a certain way. You know what I mean? They altered the audio so that a narrative could be.
I remember that. Yeah, I do remember.
Yeah, I mean, there's some incredible things. CNN did something. I won't go into it. Just the point is that just overall, the media need to be more responsible and cover things more fairly. And they don't. They don't cover police shootings fairly, for instance. They skew things in many cases. I'm very proud to say that doesn't apply to my newspaper. But
it's interesting that we got a caller, and Marcia will be with you in a minute here. It's interesting that you bring that up, and I for the first time saw it in the. There's supposed to be a distinction between editorial opinion and just we're reporting what the news is what the facts are presented to us. And let the readers in the in the normal pages of the paper outside of editorial make a judgment about what they're reading about and things like that. During the everybody knows it was a horrible crime that Dr. Nasser was doing in terms of with those young ladies up at Michigan State and things like that. But what caught my eye was in the normal pages of the Free Press in this particular case. I forget who the reporter was, but she was in essence advocating that Michigan State wasn't doing enough and things like that. And everybody comes to that judgment by looking at it, but I was surprised that the reporter was writing that way in terms of saying, Michigan State, where have you been? I mean, questions like that open up the article and things like that, and say, instead of saying, for the past 3 years, Michigan State, I was aware of this. I mean, I'm not playing editor here, but to open it up by saying, where were you, Michigan State? Why are you letting everybody down? That's really an opinion. And that was in the normal pages of what was happening versus saying, just describing the facts that they knew about it for 20 years and they didn't do anything about it. I mean, that appears to be the situation that's going on here. But I was surprised that he had become such an advocate in the regular pages, when I said in the regular stories that was supposed to be covering the event.
And if I could real quick, it's even more subtle than that. For instance, let's take the Michael Brown shooting. Our print reporters go by something called the AP Style Book. It's basically our Bible as to how you refer to things. And in the AP Style Book, you are to refer to 18-year-olds as men. They're not children. They're not teens. They're not kids. They're referred to as adults. He or she, it's a woman or a man. It's black and white in the AP Style Book. The AP itself violated own style book in the Michael Brown shooting by referring to him as a teen, as a child. So their purpose, and it's very subtle. People not in the industry don't know that. They read this and, oh my God, the cops just shot a kid. You know what I mean? That's very subtle from the outsider who doesn't know how the sausage is made. But to the insider who's, quizzical about these things, you scratch your head and say, why are you violating? He's a man. Your own style book dictates that you call him a man. And they're calling him an 18-year-old teen. They're trying to build a narrative. And that enrages me because, as somebody who really does that.
Well, you're in the profession, yeah. Those of us that have been on the receiving end of it know what you're talking about.
I mean, criticize people with facts, not your prose. That's my little. You don't criticize anybody, but if you're going to crucify somebody, you do it with the facts. Don't do it with your prose.
Okay. Appreciate it. Marcia, you're on with all of us here at 9:10 a.m.
Good morning. I'm glad enjoying the show. Listen, stop and frisk was unlawful because, it was just unlawful for them to do people like that in New York. Okay, we know that poverty pulls the trigger. We are having people get unemployed. Like the unemployment rate in Detroit is horrendous. What safety measures should you be talking about for police officers to go to these volatiles, these scenes where domestic violence is where a lot of officers lose their life. So what safety measures do they have for the officer? It's my understanding that they got a helmet that officers can wear to the scene of these volatile family domestic violence scenes to help them. Do you know anything about that? Because with the unemployment, we're going to have this increased volatile family domestic violence scenes again. So what safety measures do you have for police officers to use when they go to these scenes? Is there a helmet that they can wear? Do you know about it?
Captain Jackson, if I could speak to that, I guess the immediate answer is no. We don't have a helmet for officers to wear specifically to domestic violence runs. We do have helmets that we use when officers are engaged in tactical type entries or environments that increase high risk as it relates to.
Talking like a SWAT team type thing, yeah.
Correct. But a domestic violence run typically would not warrant that. They receive some of the most cutting edge training as it relates to domestic violence and the current trends and laws and just the dynamics of what occurs at those scenes. And that process of training is ongoing. It occurs several times throughout the year. There is some inherent risk with being a police officer and responding to those type of runs. So we just try.
Let me interject here. You know what? My brother, 40 years ago, my brother had mental problems. Do you know they used to send a psychiatrist out with the police department when you had people that was mentally deranged. My brother was acting out, and my mother about 40 years ago, and they sent out a psychiatrist and the police department there. And the psychiatrist came in, talked to him, judged that he needed to be put in an institution. They snapped him down to the ground, put a straitjacket on, and took him away. So why aren't they doing that? Why aren't they using those type of measures since England closed all the mental institutions down? Seems like to me they should.
We have a lot of officers. Our officers here in the city of Detroit are CIT trained.
What does that mean, Willie?
Crisis intervention training. So they do receive, 40 hours of that coming out of the academy. But what I'm looking at is Minneapolis. They have a program that is still a pilot phase right now. I thought it would have been out of pilot by now, but they do send caseworkers out to assist the officers when they come in contact with the mentally ill, as well as those domestic violence runs. And it is working in Minneapolis, and they do have a pretty good program that is working there. And that was something that I was able to come back with training from NACO, National Association of Civilian Law Enforcement, and And, you know, it's like a lot of agencies are starting to look at what Minneapolis is doing. And that was something that I brought out about a week ago. So I'm still looking closely at their statistics and their data. It's just a lot of information.
The helmet issue is something you've been passionate about too, hasn't it? About getting officers equipped with helmets. We spoke about this, getting them equipped with helmets so they can be a little more safe. That's something you've been kind of trying to push lately, right?
Absolutely. I think when we have our officers and we deploy them out in the community, whether it's special ops or tactical, we need to be able to protect officers head and neck from injuries. We had lost 8 officers in the past year, and then we back at this again. We just lost another great officer through the department. So we have to do better to get more funding here to protect our officers. So that's something I'm definitely pushing for ways to protect officers from head and neck injuries. So yes, I'm definitely looking for helmets, as well as looking at our officers' vests that they wear. Our officers right now are wearing level 2s. I'd love to see our guys in level 3s.
Okay. Al, whoops, we just lost Al. Okay, Al, go ahead.
Yeah, civilians can't really be safe and count on the officers protecting them when the officers themselves have to fear for their life when they come out to help somebody on a regular basis like that. And I definitely support what Willie is saying. I think we need to have more ways of understanding. In addition to having caseworkers, what I'm thinking is there needs to be some profiling of the scene. And they've probably done that in the past, but maybe they need to go back to the drawing table on this and really see to get an understanding of what's coming up. It seems to me now domestic violence situations maybe need to be regarded almost in the level of heightened awareness that one would approach an active shooter situation.
Oh yeah. That's a very volatile situation that many times the officers call it's evolved from when they used to just take the man out and walk him around Belle Isle to now it's there's a lot of danger that's associated with. We have some callers on. Kenny, you're on with the panel here.
Yes, how you doing this morning?
Good.
How you guys doing this morning? That's good.
Great.
A lot of people don't know when they call in a call saying domestic violence, people don't know that the person is mental or have a problem. So it's hard to say. Now, we can just, say that we just prepare that they have a problem. But a lot of people that have gone through domestic violence, it's not mental. So the officers or the 911 person wouldn't know if the person is mental. And like Dawg, he didn't have a chance. He was in the car. So, you can send people with him, but if the person starts shooting before they get out, it defeats the purpose. Now, my thing is, I think when they go to a domestic violence call, they should park away from the house. That would be a good thing. That way, it wouldn't give them where they could aim or shoot at them before they get there. Because when they see them pulling up in a car, if they mental, then they are firing. They can fire on them.
Kenny, you probably have a good idea. I think the captain says that they are trained to not be visibly in front of the house with the scout card. Captain, you know what?
Yeah, that's correct. They're taught to park down from the location, walk to the location, so that they can give them opportunity to assess the situation as they approach. I'm sorry. In Officer Dawson's case, that didn't occur.
It's sad that our officers is not getting respected, and they're here to help us, and we all need them, and y'all doing a good job. Let me be the one to tell y'all that y'all doing a good job, and I'm proud of our officers in the city, and y'all keep on, and y'all got my support.
Thank you, Kenny. George, you had something you wanted to say?
I was just going to say, Kenny brought up the mental health issue. I counted, and since 2016, October 2016, so it's not been quite 2 years, there have been at least 5 officers shot, 3 fatal by people with mental problems. And that's not counting like Joel Dobris, the rookie cop who got his face slashed by a woman with a box cutter who was mentally ill. This is a huge, I got a story coming out probably Monday, I'm not sure, But it's a huge problem in law enforcement. The captain could probably address this because Officer Doss was killed by a guy who allegedly has mental issues. I mean, we talked earlier about Engler closing down all the clinics.
Call us, who's now running Michigan State. Yeah.
Yeah, that has a real effect on the streets of Detroit. There's 5 officers. I'm sure there's probably more. How many were shot at that we didn't hear about? You know, it's a huge problem.
Yeah, the largest mental health facility now in the state of Michigan is the Wayne County Jail.
Yeah, that's what Benny just told me. Yeah.
Yeah, it's since I was there, and it's continued on through. And one of the issues is that you close down these mental health facilities, and people go on the street. And even if the judge, they used to be able to put them in facilities to make assessments and everything else. Now they're doing it in the jail as best they can. But let's face it, it's not a psychiatric ward. I mean, they actually got psych wards in the jail, but it is not the same type of care that you get within a facility. In terms of what needs to be done. We have a number of callers. Go ahead.
One of the things that I mentioned a week ago was that, I will be calling on, legislators to create some type of legislation to protect our officers, and also to protect the mentally ill. We got a mentally ill population that is growing. And it's growing at a rate that, it's really scary and it's really dangerous. We need to do something. And, right now I'm talking with people from other cities as well as talking to people locally. And I'm looking at best practices and best procedures as far as.
We know that it's kind of interesting. Outside of opioids, I think the second amount of drugs that are prescribed now is for depression and things like that. So there's a lot of mental health issues that are out there that just don't get addressed. Curtis, you're on with the panel here. Curtis?
Good morning.
Good morning. You're on with us here at 9:10 a.m.
Oh, great. I just wanted to ask if there was any initiative to have corporations in the city of Detroit partner with the Green Light program. I wouldn't even mind, if you walk into a Green Light store and they had even an advertisement up that says this Green Light was provided by Quicken or GM. Is there any initiative to get the businesses to partner on the cost?
You mean like a corporate sponsorship and say, besides my own buildings that I own, that they're willing to sponsor Green Light for a number of other local businesses that might not be able to afford it? Is that what you're saying?
That's what I was thinking. Instead of making it mandatory, help these guys with the cost to get it installed.
I have not heard that, but there could be nonprofits that are set up for that, possibly. I mean, I'm just putting on my thinking cap. I've not heard of. Usually within the private businesses, they usually don't fund for other businesses. Depending on if they're competitors and things like that, is the way that it's set up. Generally, they rely on the business itself to fund itself. But there might be, you might have some entrepreneurs that are just starting out and they're just starting in a brick and mortar business, meaning, that they actually have a location, and that might be something that might be able to help them.
Yeah, actually, I agree with what you're saying there. But to add on, you could think of it not as necessarily doing a favor for the other business, but I think what you're saying is that it becomes advertising for them, that the sponsorship becomes kind of a way of promoting themselves as a responsible community partner. And also if it's like gas stations and small businesses around where a corporation has their offices, it might actually be helpful to their employees as well.
There might be organizations. There are like a Detroit Downtown Partnership is a business council of all the businesses, a lot of major businesses that are downtown. And, they have fundraising projects, and they raise quite a bit of money and things like that in what they do. And that might be, if they took on a project like that. Because some of them, they've encouraged some of their businesses to pay for like some of the patrol cars. You might see their name on, I think that's on some of them and things like that. But like some of the newer Detroit PD cars and things like that, it was through corporate sponsorship that helped pay for some of that, which is an idea to, perhaps toss around as part of it. I understand we have 1 more minute left. So I want to thank our panel for being with us here today. Scotty Boman, that has looked at the Detroit Police Commission and civilian interest in understanding what the Detroit Police Commission is and help understand Detroit PD better. Commissioner Willie Burton from the 5th District that represents them on it. Captain Jackson, who's been a wealth of information here that has helped us with a number of initiatives and projects such as ceasefire and things like that. And George Hunter from the Detroit News that writes a lot about Detroit PD, about crime and different issues that face what's going to happen. It sounds like perhaps Monday or Tuesday with another article that's coming about mental health, which we appreciate the preview here, George. Thanks for joining us. I want to thank everybody. Enjoy the Super Bowl today. Because of such the Michigan dominance in this area, it looks like everybody's pulling for New England. That's right. Some of us are still pulling for the Eagles and see what happens here. So again, thanks to everybody, and listen next week.
(910 AM Superstation). We're the voice of facts.
Here's what I'm talking about. We have these